Hello, welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with the thought leader, Charles Coulombe.
Thought leader.
Yeah, you don't want to be a thought leader? You lead people in thoughts?
Who are my colleagues in the thought leader community?
You know who your followers are.
Not followers.
Oh, colleagues?
My colleagues.
Oh, Judith Katz?
Who?
Judith Katz?
Oh, yes, that's right. Judith Katz. Gosh, the whiteness chick.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if gosh. So she's the thought leader.
Yeah.
You know, what we need to do is to get 48 other thought leaders together. Okay. And we could start the 50 Famous Thought Leaders School. Now, you too can learn in the privacy of your own home what you need to become a member of the burgeoning thought leader industry. Yes, you can have your own podcast, give interviews, take interviews, guest on other people's podcasts, and become the most important and interesting person you know. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, fill your entire life with endless, meaningless drivel. All you have to do is take our course, and you too can sound like you mean something, even if you've got no bloody idea what you're talking about. You mean like
5 easy payments of $29.95. Act now. Operators are standing by.
And that's not all. Oh, gosh. Void were prohibited by sanity.
It's funny how there's this collective... It's all this collective junk that everyone has in their minds from our culture. You know?
Yeah. And it's great. We always invoke it now, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if you're bored with it, but I never cease to be amused. It slices, it dices. You're both right. It's a dessert topping and a battery acid. Wait a minute. If I act now, does that mean I get... Yes, it does.
Some of those people are natural-born salesmen. I think my sister, she bought ShamWow, and apparently ShamWow is really good. Remember that? ShamWow?
I don't.
It's a really absorbent cloth, I guess, where you just wipe it and incredible absorption rate.
Well, see, that's the thing. There were always household things, as usually. There were always household supplies. Not always. I mean, sometimes there would be books or records. A series of them. Yeah. Like Time Life was big.
Yeah. Songs from the 50s and 60s, and it's like this giant CD collection that's like $100 or something like that.
That's what they would do, and they would have in the song things like the Longines Sinfonette Society. I remember they would put out these things, but you would have the pitchman talking, and very often it was period music like 50s stuff or 40s or whatever. He'd be dressed in costume. He might have a beautiful chick similarly dressed. He says, you get all these bands, the Chiffons, the Shirelles, and meanwhile behind him you see all the titles of the songs that are in the collection.
Right, yeah.
And then at the very end would be Act Now, Void Were Prohibited, et cetera, and all the usual jargon that we love so well. Those, I'm glad they're still doing those.
Yeah.
So there'd be music, and as I say, book collections were also advertised. So books, music, and appliances and houseware products, detergents of different kinds, soaps, food prep things were big.
And there's still a bunch of them. I'm in awe of the My Pillow guy. You ever see that? The My Pillow guy, where you'll have the best night's sleep of your life, and it's all about this pillow. And now he's selling bed sheets now, Giza sheets or whatever. And he wrote a book, And I love his book where it's not just one near-death experience. He says it's like, oh, in this book, I have 17 near-death experiences. Like, it's literally like double.
And he has 17 of them. You can count them.
Apparently, he's a good Catholic, though. I don't know. That's what they say. Who knows?
Well, I'm all for it. I mean, look, the business of America is business. It's who we are.
Who said that?
Oh,
Which president?
That was President Coolidge. You know, I just got news. This just in. I'm very sorry to hear this, ladies and gentlemen. Speaking of Catholics in the media, apparently Regis Philbin died.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah, it just flashed across my screen. My nephew, in Coulombe speak, whenever a celebrity dies, it's always preceded by the words "they got."
Oh yeah, they got him.
So
yeah,
they got Regis Philbin.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that.
How old was he?
Gosh, I don't know. It must have been in his 80s. He's been retired for quite a while.
I see. He had sort of this youthful thing. He's kind of like Dick Clark. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where
Dick Clark's gone too. Thanks for reminding me.
Sorry.
I'm supposed to live with this now. But yeah, no, Regis Philbin, great loss to our industry, no doubt about it. I feel very self-important just saying our industry. It makes me feel like something or other.
Yeah.
But certainly we grew up with Regis Philbin.
I can't watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire anymore. It's so cringe. I forgot who they're hosting. I think Jimmy Kimmel or whatever. It's very cringe now that Regis is not hosting it.
Well, he would do Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He did, what was the other one? The Weakest Link.
No, he did not. That was a lady.
No, he did it for a time. I'm pretty sure he did. No, it was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Never mind, I lied.
Yeah.
The lady, though, you know what she based her persona on?
Who, Donald Trump? I don't know.
A nun that taught her. It's true. Not a joke. Anyway, and I also would see Philbin with Good Morning with Regis and Kathy Lee and Regis and whomever.
What, Kelly Ripa? Is that the thing?
Yeah, Kelly is the current one. Regis and Kelly.
Yeah.
And before it was Regis and Kathy Lee. And when he left, I stopped watching.
I've never watched that, so. But
well,
yeah.
He used to make a lot of fun of the Jersey Shore people. Remember them?
I don't know those people. I don't associate with those people.
You just don't like them because they're Italians from the Northeast.
I don't like this Guido culture. I don't approve of this.
So basically, I'm stuck standing up for the Guidos of the world, is what you're saying.
Yes.
And for Suki.
What is that?
Not what, but who. She was the sort of the ditzy, I can't say ditzy blonde because she wasn't, the ditzy black-haired Italian chick on the Jersey Shore.
You watched the Jersey Shore?
No, but I watched Regis and Kathy Lee, or Regis and Kelly, and they were constantly making fun of it. So that's how I got to know about the characters.
Wow.
Suki had a hairdo that was like an Amy Winehouse knockoff. And Kelly, as you know, is blonde. So I think it was Halloween or something one year. He was dressed as the Situation, and she was dressed as Suki with this thing on her head. It was very funny.
Okay.
Well, anyway, I'm sorry Regis Philbin is gone. I'm sorry that the golden age of broadcasting is over. I'm sorry for the America that I knew.
So, what is new?
What is new? Good question, good question. Well, we had a little bit of a corona scare, but it came and went. And one of the things that has everyone kind of worried about in Europe is the idea of the second wave. And I have a little bit of a problem with that. And I'll tell you why. The whole idea of the second wave is based upon the flu. Because, the flu subsides in warm weather, and then a given flu will very often come back a second year, and then go off into obscurity, where it belongs. People are talking about a second wave of the corona, but the corona apparently is not affected by weather either way. That's what the CDC are saying now, although other people are saying it is. But if it's not, why would there be a second wave?
Maybe there's an answer out there that you just haven't researched.
Maybe it's all bizarre and silly. What I want to know is why Portland isn't put down under medical lockdown, quarantine, the whole bloody city.
Why would they need that?
Well, because they're constantly demonstrating and rioting and not social distancing and mask wearing. That's why. Somehow, rioters and looters are exempted from it. And then when the things subside, then there's a second wave for some reason.
What a coincidence.
Hard to imagine how that could be.
Well, the thing that really grabbed my attention was in Florida, where there were districts that reported like 99% coronavirus rate, like Orlando and others. Fox News had reported this, and like they report. So you had these various districts that were reporting like 99%, when the actual rate ended up being like 9%. Multiple, like this happened multiple places. So, to me, that throws up. I mean, alarm bells are going off for me because we're always talking about science and data. Well, the integrity of the data is compromised now. I mean, we have to look at our internal controls and see what is going on. I don't see how nobody could think, oh, 99% contagion rate. Yeah, this is fine. This makes
so
sense.
Everybody's in the district. The district is sick.
Allegedly,
I mean,
as they report, yeah.
The problem, of course, is that if we ever do get something like the bubonic plague, nobody's going to believe anything.
Yeah, it's the boy who cried wolf.
I'm sorry?
It's
like
the boy who cried wolf. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly like the boy who cried wolf. Although that reminds me of a cartoon I saw once.
Okay.
It showed this miniature UFO landed in a backyard, and these little creatures marching out of it. And this kid is on the back porch looking at this, and he says, "It's okay, Mom. It's nothing." And the caption was, "The boy who cried sheep."
Got it.
Well, glad you got it. I'm not sure I know what's going on. Why should I? But I can't tell you, though, that I feel very, what's the word? I don't know. The Portlanders, of course, this goes on and on and on. The federal people are getting involved, and now the locals are saying, oh, we don't need help, and so on. Well, just burn, baby, burn. Let it all hang out. Start with the city hall and then see what happens.
Okay, time for the memes of production.
Nationalize the memes of production.
For the common good, because we can't trust anyone else.
No, it could be fake news.
That's right. All right, let's number one. Okay, here we go. Ooh, this one I plucked from Charles's timeline. We've got firm handshakes, social justice warriors with white supremacists uniting to ban black characters on products.
That's right. And that, incidentally, comes from the recent successful campaign to get rid of Uncle Ben and Aunt Jemima, the first black couple of American cookery. So they're going out, for the first time I've made it myself to the memes.
Oh yeah, here you go. Let me bring it up on the screen for everybody. Okay, these two old people. Who are these people, Charles?
Well, these are the replacements for Uncle Ben and Aunt Jemima. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Uncle Kip and Aunt Muffy. They are the new, more socially relevant logos / pitchmen for, on the one hand, Uncle Kip's converted rice, and on the other, Aunt Muffy's pancake flour. Now, I unveiled this new campaign on Facebook, and some of the reactions were very interesting. This one lady who wrote in that on Muffy doesn't look as though she's been in a kitchen for years, and she wouldn't eat any of her pancakes. She said she didn't trust her.
I don't trust her either.
What? Look at Aunt Muffy. She looks sweet.
These people are not marketable. What
do you mean they're not marketable? They're not black?
I don't want that old man's rice or her pancakes.
So you trust Uncle Ben and Aunt Jemima over a couple of well-to-do white people?
That's 100% right. It's a secret recipe passed down through tradition.
Well, I'm sure Aunt Muffy has that. She probably shares it with the other ladies at the cotillion.
I don't think so, Charles.
You don't think so?
I don't buy it.
And for all you know, Uncle Kip owns a rice plantation in Brazil somewhere. No, I'm telling you, Uncle Kip and Aunt Muffy are the wave of the future. America, behold your merchandising.
All right, let's get to the next one.
All right, fine.
Oh, here we go. Which careless medieval person getting stabbed are you today? We have like a bunch of really, I don't know these people. Do you know any of these people, Charles?
Not really. They look vaguely familiar, but it's all right. You know, I like random very much. I'm into random.
How come so many medieval people are getting stabbed? Are these all saints? I assume they're saints.
I think some of them were saints. Some of them were just figures who got stabbed.
Oh, okay.
But a lot of people, you got to bear in mind that in an age without firearms, they had to make do with what they had.
Yeah, I guess so.
Listen, JFK, Pope John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, President Garfield, President McKinley. None of these guys would have been assassinated with guns in the Middle Ages.
That's true. I guess it's swords.
Yeah, that's all we had. If you wanted to kill somebody, you had to get up close and personal.
Okay.
They didn't even have drones back then. Shows you how primitive they were.
Okay, last one for today. I'm going to do a slow reveal on this one. So, 7 things every kid needs to hear.
Oh, that's beautiful. Now, see, this is good for you. You're going to be a great sensitive dad.
I am. You just have to follow this. You're going to be a good dad. Okay, so number 1, I love you.
True.
Number 2, I'm proud of you.
Yes.
Number 3, I'm sorry.
That people forget that, but it's important.
Yeah. Number 4, I forgive you.
Also important.
Yeah. Number 5, I'm listening.
Yep. Absolutely important.
Number 6, communism has failed every time it was tried.
Very true. Kid needs to hear these things.
That's actually true. Like, with these, I don't know, these people don't know yet. You have to get them and teach this when they're young, yet somehow this isn't in public school education, I don't think.
I will wager that the little children who are burning and pulling down statues right now never heard any of these things growing up. It's a cry for help.
So number
basically, when they yank down a statue of Christopher Columbus or Father Sarah or General Lee, they're saying, "Love me, Daddy, love me." That's really what it's a cry for help. Any more lines of wisdom on that meme?
Oh yeah, last one. Number 7, you've got what it takes.
And that's very true too. See, these are the things today's children, especially the little ones rioting, never heard from their mommies and daddies. So the next time you find yourself down by juvenile hall, or in whatever clink they're putting the college children in who've been rioting, I want everyone to go up to each of them and say each of these statements. They'll appreciate it. A cry for help from the mental midgets.
It's just so hard not arguing with the crazy people in the asylum. Sometimes it is so hard. You have to have so much restraint.
It's true. Well, I mean, it's pointless because they're emotionally invested. Anyway, on a happier note, and there's always a happier note, I neglected to mention this, but I had Schweinsbraten for lunch. I love Schweinsbraten.
What is that?
Huge chunks of pork meat. 2 of them, covered in incredible pork garlic gravy with dumplings.
Sounds tasty.
It was. It was. You know, they warned me when I came out to this part of the world. All they cook in Central Europe are pork and potatoes. Yeah. And when I finished it, I had iced cafe. And that is vanilla ice cream with coffee poured onto it. A long, long glass topped with real whipped cream.
Sounds delish.
It is.
Okay, so I'm going to make an announcement. We're going to do a special patron exclusive segment for patrons only. I really wanted to talk about old-timey movies for the new generations. You know, we're watching movies now from the 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s. And new things are jumping out at me. Things that our society needs to hear from some of these old-timey movies. And so I wanted to just talk about them, but then I thought, you know what? Let's get everyone involved. Let's get the patrons involved. So patrons, send in your comments of old movies that you like, that you enjoy heavily, and you think have good lessons in them for modern times. So patrons only. Okay, so if you're not a patron yet, now's the perfect time. We just literally did, the pre-show was an hour and 10 minutes. And so if you become a patron, you're going to have access to all the pre-shows. It's got to be, I don't know, an extra 20 hours of content or something by now. Patron exclusive. We'll do it, I don't know, maybe if not this week, maybe next week, so we can get in everybody's movies. And I'm sure you have movies, Charles.
Oh boy, do I ever. I am thinking of everything from Grand Hotel, Dinner at 8, On Borrowed Time, High Noon, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
I don't know any of those other than the Westerns.
They Might Be Giants.
That's a band.
It is, but it took its name from the movie, which was taken from a play, and is probably my single favorite film of all time.
Wow. Who's in it?
George C. Scott, Joanne Woodward.
Wow. Okay.
And another, I know this is beyond the 60s date set, but another great favorite of mine, going all the way back to 1977, is called The Late Show, with the late and much lamented Aunt Connie, and oh gosh, what's her name? She's a comedian, funny woman, and my mind is
Carol Burnett.
No, same era. Don't help me. Lily Tomlin.
Lily Tomlin.
Lily
okay.
Tomlin. That's who it is.
Is that who I think? Wait, Lily Tomlin. She's famous now for a different reason.
I'm sure she is.
She had an eruption in I Heart Huckabees, where
yes,
where she's like the biggest, nastiest person in the history of the world, where she has this tantrum and everyone is just sitting there taking it. Dustin Hoffman, I think Mark Wahlberg gets a car shot, and she's just absolutely out of control.
And
have you seen that video?
I have not seen I Heart Huckabees.
No, I haven't seen that movie either. It's while they're shooting it. No, like it's real life.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Well, she has issues. She's an interesting lady, but she has definite problems as a person, gender issues and so forth.
Anyhow,
she has gender issues and that kind of thing. But she plays a hippy dippy, just total 60s chick in 77. And Art Carney plays a hard-boiled old detective who, the Dashiell Hammett Marlowe school, just very Sam Spade and Raymond Chandler's character, Philip Marlowe, that kind of guy from the 40s, only 30 years later. So he's a little older. And Lily Tomlin's cat has been kidnapped. But it's not as simple as it seems, because before the cat gets kidnapped, his partner comes in shot. So he's got to get out and find the man who killed his partner and get Lily Tomlin's cat. But it evokes the old film noir really wonderfully. I saw it when it came out in the movies. I was in high school, and it just same year that Star Wars came out.
Ooh.
And which of the two do people remember? Yeah, exactly. Don't even answer that question. However, I'll have you know that I saw Star Wars the day after it premiered at the Chinese Theater with my mom and dad and brother.
Okay.
That's what being raised in Hollywood does for you. Yeah.
Yeah, you see good movies. What?
Where they premiere at Grauman's Chinese.
I've seen the midnight showings in Universal City for plenty of movies. I saw it for The Dark Knight. How do you like that one? Dark Knight.
Well, you wouldn't have if you'd been raised in Indiana. So there, smart guy. Anyway.
Yeah.
No, but I think this will be a lot of fun. You've heard of A High Noon and A Christmas Carol, but you never heard of On Borrowed Time.
No.
That's a great one with Barrymore, Lionel Barrymore, who manages to capture death and keep him stuck in a tree.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, interesting things happen. But there's a wonderful phrase to describe the land of death.
Okay.
Where the woodbine twineth.
Huh. I don't know what that means.
Well, the woodbine is a vine. And it's just very evocative. Sometimes there are phrases that may not mean that much specifically, but they carry kind of a evocative connotation.
Yeah.
So, where do you go where you die? Where the woodbine twineth.
Very poetic.
Exactly. And that was the thing about those old films. Even the horror films. Think of Dracula. I mean, there was a movie with poetry to it.
That's true.
It was a dark poetry, but that was the thing about horror films in the golden days of black and white. And they had morals as well. I always think of Van Helsing resisting Dracula. And remember, Van Helsing's this shriveled up old guy, and Dracula is Lugosi. And he says, "You have a very strong will, Dr. Van Helsing, for one so young."
Interesting. Because Dracula's older.
Well, just by a few centuries.
Yeah. Okay, so become a patron. Patron, send in your movies. We'll talk about them on that episode. Patron only. Okay.
Sad but true. All right, we got questions.
Okay, first one is from Brian.
All right.
Charles, what was the inspiration behind the Anti-Masonic Movement led by John Quincy Adams? How successful was it?
Woof. Well, to answer your question, it was inspired by the disappearance of a man whose name escapes me, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers will know exactly who I mean. I'm not doing well with names this evening. but this inspired a mass movement against Freemasonry because the fellow in question had made a name for himself by threatening to reveal all sorts of Masonic secrets, and then he disappeared. So that was the start of the Anti-Masonic Movement. It didn't last long. They did manage to field a candidate in a presidential election, and the man was called William Wirt, W-I-R-T. I remember his name. I don't know why. But he carried one state.
Which one?
Vermont.
That's pretty random.
Yeah, I know. But I think the reason is that the guy who was kidnapped was from Vermont. It might have actually been in Vermont that it happened. I forget. But don't worry. I know our viewers will rush to tell me what I've forgotten.
Well, it's kind of a disappointment that the whole anti-Masonic movement was rooted in just that kidnapping rather than sort of a rejection of the ideals.
Well, to reject the ideals would be to reject the ideals of America herself. It would be to reject...
But that was in its infancy, though. I mean, that's the second
it was
president.
still big in its infancy. I mean, look at John Quincy Adams, who was the leader of the thing. He was a Unitarian.
Okay. How many Unitarian presidents have we had? About, approximately.
3, I think.
Any 20th century? Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and John Quincy Adams.
You only remember Thomas Jefferson because that quote where he believes not a single man...
now living. Not a single young man now living in this country of freedom will not die a Unitarian. That's hard to forget. And then, of course, but in terms of modern presidents, none. Not a one. Calvin Coolidge was a Congregationalist.
Not a name. You know,
not a name.
You know, because, like, to me, Eisenhower's Unitarian.
In a sense, I mean, his approach to religion was very much like Unitarians.
Yeah.
He believed he had to belong to something. Well, and Unitarians are very big on the corporate side of church. You know, they believe in church suppers and barbecues, and the coffee hour is almost a sacrament for them after the service, and Sunday schools and all that. One of Garrison Keillor's rather cruel jokes is to maintain that Lake Wobegon was founded by Unitarian missionaries. Now, you know, that's one thing that no.
Okay.
No. You don't have Unitarian missionaries. I don't know that he's much of a believer himself, but he knows enough about Unitarianism to know that that wouldn't be happening.
Okay. Question from Anthony. What are Charles's thoughts on Mary, Queen of Scots? Is she considered a martyr by the church? In most things I've read or films I've watched, she is portrayed as mentally unstable and helped murder her husband. Based on your reading, what is a more accurate view of her?
Well, I heard once that from somebody that you should never get your history off of movies or TV.
Yeah,
I heard that from somebody.
You heard that, yeah.
Yeah, I heard that. So basically what you think you know about her is wrong. Mary Queen of Scots has actually, her cause as a martyr has been bandied around. No less than Monsignor Ronald Knox was a big proponent of both her and Henry VI getting canonized. The two questions that people always have are, was she involved in the murder of her husband, which is unlikely, Lord Darnley, who was not a very nice man. He was the father of James I, but he was not a nice fellow, and he ended up getting blown to bits in his house. And then the other questions that they have is, she was basically kidnapped by this fellow Bothwell and forced to marry him. The question is, how much was she complicit in that kidnapping? And then the third question is, was she actually involved in the attempts to murder Queen Elizabeth, her cousin, when she was being held captive in England? For those of you who don't know, Mary Queen of Scots was the daughter and sole offspring of King James V of Scotland, and his wife Mary of Guise was a French noble lady. When her father died, she was sent for safekeeping to France, and her mother reigned as regent and had to deal with the rising power of the Protestant noblemen in Scotland and of the evil John Knox. When she was in France, she was engaged to the Dauphin, the heir to the King of France. The old king died, her husband became king and reigned for a couple of years and died. And she was queen, but she was very young. And then her mother, she came of age, and then her mother sent for her to come back to Scotland to take up the reins. Well, of course, when she got back to Scotland, it was a mess. She was Catholic, and she had the support of the Catholic lords in the country. But the Protestants were keen on getting rid of her. She tried to compromise with them, and it didn't work, so there was a civil war. She lost. Her rescuer / captor was this fellow Bothwell. Then the Ender cause was completely defeated. Her husband, as I say, was kind of palmed off on her by Elizabeth, was a cousin. Got her pregnant. She gave birth, but then he was a real loser and plotted against her, apparently. The exact identity of who was responsible for his killing is still a matter of debate. Still a matter of debate. And then the long and the short of it was that her cause collapsed. She fled to England, hoping that her cousin would look after her. And instead, Elizabeth threw her into prison. And then, when Elizabeth's legitimacy, having only been recognized by the church on the proviso that she retain her sister's reestablishment of the Catholic Church, which she didn't. For many, many Catholics, Mary Queen of Scots was considered to be the rightful heiress. So suddenly Mary Queen of Scots became a political threat to Elizabeth. And eventually she was implicated in a plot against Elizabeth. Rightly or wrongly is one of the things that people debate about. Forged letters and all that kind of thing. So Elizabeth finally had her executed. And that was the end of Mary Queen of Scots.
Well, there's a couple areas in that story where you seem to leave it in question.
Well, those are the areas that people question. Personally, if you want what I think she's innocent of all charges, and I think she may very well be a saint.
Why?
What's that?
Why?
Oh, I've read the prayers she wrote. They don't seem like the prayers of a woman with a guilty conscience.
Okay. Where can we find those prayers?
Go on. There's a search engine called Google.
Okay.
Put in Mary Queen of Scots and prayers.
Prayers. Okay.
You can also put in Mary Queen of Scots and Ronald Knox, and you'll get a discussion of her supposed sanctity.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Thomas. Hello, Charles, and a modest bow to Sir Vincent. I have a few questions I hope you could answer. I finished reading The Mass and Its Folklore, which I purchased from Tumblr House along with many other books that got me free shipping.
Free shipping?
That's right, Charles. Buy The Mass and Its Folklore and another book, let's say Star Spangled Crown. All orders over $25 get free shipping and handling.
Free shipping and handling?
Act now, but sorry, void where prohibited and no CODs.
Operators are standing by.
Okay, so, what did I read here? I was intrigued by the brief section on the bidding prayers given before the sermon. Would Charles please elaborate on where it was customary to include these prayers, what started them, and when did they fall out of disuse?
Well, there have always been prayers for the needs of people from the very beginning of the church. And these were expressed in different ways in the different rites, Latin, Byzantine, so on and so on. In the Middle Ages, they were kind of rough and ready, and they would go on for a while. The suffrages, they were also called. They were abolished in the Latin Rite at the Council of Trent.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't recall them in the Tridentine.
No. Well, see, the Tridentine Mass, although things like the canon and all that were unchanged, what they did do was cut down a lot on the changeable parts of the Mass. So, for instance, they got rid of the bidding prayers, the suffrages. They got rid of most of the sequences. They got rid of most of the proper prefaces. They got rid of what were called the tropes, which were additions to certain prayers. So, for instance, a good example of a trope, of a revived trope, is with one of the versions of the penitential rite in the New Mass, where, they turn the Kyrie into English, and then they enlarge on it. So, Lord, you were sent to heal the contrite. Lord, have mercy. Lord, you're really kind of neat. Christ, have mercy. Lord, it's just great being in California. Lord, whatever. Lord, you were sent to heal the contrite is the one I remember. But those are examples of tropes, additional prayers tacked on to existing liturgical prayers. So Trent, amongst other things, those 4 areas, the bidding prayers or suffrages, the tropes, the number of proper sequences, the number of proper prefaces were cut way, way down. Also, number of litanies were cut way down.
So back to the bidding prayers, where were those prayers said?
Usually around the time of the offertory.
Okay. And what started them?
Well, as I said, they go back to the very beginning of the church, because the prayers for the needs of the people, we can see this with Justin Martyr and with Tertullian and the Didache, all the earliest accounts of the Mass. People prayed for the emperor and his armies. They prayed for the bishops and the clergy. They prayed for the people themselves. They prayed for good weather and plentiful crops.
I see.
And then they would pray, if there was disease or famine or war, they would pray for peace, the passing of the famine, and plenty, that kind of stuff.
Okay, Thomas also asks, I recall an episode a long time ago with a question on Antonio Salazar. Would Charles please elaborate? Would he elaborate further on some of the good and bad things of Salazar's regime and what made him an effective leader? And could he please describe Salazar's ideological reasoning behind supporting corporatism but not the monarchy in Portugal?
All right, well, Salazar, number one, he was just out of pure interest, he was an ordained subdeacon. And a celibate and very devout. And that gave him a lot of his power. He was very single-minded. And Portugal, after the overthrow of the monarchy in 1910, the government had gone through various changes, none of them good. There had been various anti-clerical regimes, And Portugal was in a terrible state, and she'd not done well with World War One, which she entered for no real reason. So the long and the short of it was that Salazar had a country in his hands whose people were looking for anything to help them put things back together. His strengths, again, were that he was very devout. He believed in Catholic social teaching. A lot of his weaknesses depend on who you talk to. He was authoritarian. Now, what did that mean? It meant that he did not like a lot of open opposition. Well, he had vowed to remake Portuguese society. And if you're going to do that, you're going to get opposition. You know, imagine that we suddenly had a president who said, you know, all the rioting, no more. All the peaceful protests, no more, because they turn into riots. And they've got nothing to do with anything real anyway, because the dead guys, murderers, are being tried. That's it. You don't get to talk about this anymore.
What a tyrant! That sounds like a nightmare.
I'm sure. And he would encounter definite opposition. Well, how do you deal with that opposition? Well, I'm not saying I recommend this, but if 7 or 8 of them are publicly executed, it gives the others something to think about. I'm not saying this is a smart idea. What I'm saying is that the stronger the opposition, the stronger the response. One of the things that have used Americans to have helped Americans have a relatively placid history is that generally the opposition has not been that strong to anything. So when Andrew Jackson or FDR acted like quasi-dictators, the reaction, nobody was trying to kill them. Nobody was trying to push back. So they didn't push back. You see what I mean?
Yeah. It's not as... We've never had like that type of trauma, I guess you could say.
No, not yet. But if we had, and Portugal certainly did, then the response to opposition would be much less pleasant. So that's something you've got to bear in mind. As it is today, if I were a tyrant in the United States and I was dealing with all this sort of thing, I would simply dox and isolate the opponents. Facebook, for instance, would suddenly be monitored.
Wow.
Yeah, that'd be the end of it. And if you didn't like it, guess what? Too bad. Kind of like, now if you express a belief in traditional marriage,
You keep saying doxed now. Did you just learn this word? You've said it
I did.
I could tell because...
And canceled.
No, you knew that for a while.
And Karen.
You've known these things for a while.
I've known Karen very long.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you've learned what doxing is. That's actually a big deal.
It is. And there's only one way to deal with it, is dox the doxers. Whenever anybody gets doxed, be sure to send a note to whoever's doxing them and remind them that they're being watched by outsiders and they're not fooling anyone.
So anything else about Salazar?
Well, yeah, a lot more. So the thing was, Salazar, the reason why he backed corporatism was because it was an element of Catholic social teaching, which you'll see in Quadragesimo Anno. The idea that the different branches of production, rather than being made up of eternally fighting labor, capital, retail, etc., should cooperate for the common good. And that, of course, is the biggest thing about corporatism, is cooperation for the common good, not just of the shoe industry or the ironmongery industry, but of the society as a whole, the idea that we're all of us interconnected.
Yeah, just a brief caveat. I had a lot of trauma this past month, and I remember asking you. I said, "How come the employee always has to fully invest in the company, but the company doesn't need to invest at all in the employee?"
That's capitalism.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you said. You said that's the difference between corporatism and capitalism.
Yeah.
And
I mean, they have no obligation.
And I said, color me a corporatist then.
Well, see, the basic idea was that the company owner, I mean, and the ultimate inspiration for it, the company owner should look at his employees the way a feudal lord looked at his serfs.
And treat them like slaves?
That is the scumbaggy crap that you had put in your mind. No, like a father looks at his children.
Oh, that's just LARPing. That's idealistic.
No, it's
that's
the way.
So naive.
Unlike the system you live under. Okay, great, thanks. But no, the fact is that we know historically that it usually worked out this way.
How do we know that?
Fact, what's that?
Oh, continue. Sorry.
Because the fact of the matter is, all of us have two reasons for doing anything: selfish and idealistic. And we're the most fervent when the two combine. When doing what we want to do, what we think benefits us, also fulfills our ideals. That's when we're at our best, when we really put out for it. If we think it's just going to do if it's just going to fulfill our self-interest, we may very well do it, but unless we're utter monsters, we'll feel kind of guilty. Contrariwise, if we're doing something purely to suit our ideals, we'll do it, but we won't necessarily be happy about it. But on those wonderful occasions when what we can do both benefits us and fulfills our ideals, oh, it's great. You can feel good about getting good.
And that is what happened in feudalism.
It sure was. Everybody pulls together. In the immortal words of the matron of the prison in Chicago, let's all stroke together like the Princeton crew. Reciprocity is how the system works. Whereas in the industrial thing, the workers were simply a commodity to be used and tossed aside. But you couldn't do that with serfs.
I'm going to be a devil's advocate because I'm going to hold you to a higher standard because
than you would what you've already been used with. I get, yeah, okay.
Because you have told me that you have, well, I don't know if I can say this publicly, but that you don't like abstract reasoning like that.
I do not.
Well, you just did that.
Well, no, I didn't, because the fact is, the vast majority of serfs under serfdom lived far better and more happily than workers in sweatshops.
But I guess what I'm asking is, why aren't you making this argument on a historical basis? Why are you choosing to use a weaker abstract argument than a historical basis?
I just used an historical basis. You want me to go through country after country?
What was your historical basis?
The medieval serf worked about 30 days a year for his lord.
I've heard. Yeah. Okay. See, that's good.
Yeah. No. Now,
what? I'm saying those
major holidays that he got off, and there were many more holy days of obligation than there are now. Those holidays, at whose expense did he eat again? Oh, the Lord's. That's right. I forgot.
So it took 30 days a year to raise crops?
Yeah. I mean, 30 days a year of sustained effort. Remember, you're not the only one doing it.
So a collective effort requires only 30 days from everybody?
Yeah. It's all required.
So nobody had... Okay. That's interesting. Where'd you hear the 30 days thing?
Oh, gosh, I've read it many, many different times, so I presume it's true. I wasn't there myself, not being quite that old yet.
Okay.
But there's more.
I'll stop pushing. Okay, go on.
How many days a year do you work for the federal government to pay your income tax?
I don't know. 5 days a week, pretty much. 52 weeks. I don't know what that is. Minus vacation and holidays.
Well, the average worker works something like 200 and change days a year to pay off his income tax, as opposed to 30 days a year for the feudal lord.
Live in
but we're free!
No, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say we have a lifestyle that even the kings of old didn't have.
That is very true. You're right. But it comes at a tremendous cost.
At working?
Yeah, working at garbage jobs for things that don't really fulfill you. You think that farming, which is heavy, backbreaking labor during the harvest and all that, it also, nevertheless, generates an incredibly rich culture. Where do you think all of our folklore came from? All the folk dances and all that. They didn't come out of magic. They came out of people with a lot of leisure time on their hands. And you know the biggest period of leisure time?
What?
Late autumn and into winter. And what happened in those times?
What?
Major feasts.
Thinking about it more, your 30 days doesn't make sense to me because of the saying ora et labora. Mm-hmm. So,
well, remember, they were also working for themselves. You got to bear in mind that it's not like it was a commune where everybody took care of everything. You worked 30 days a year for the Lord, but you had to do your own planting for yourself, your own harvesting for yourself. You took care of your own animals. Now, mind you, your grain that you raised on your field, that when you weren't working for the Lord, you were working your own fields, you see? And it's not like those 30 days were a block.
Okay, well...
All right, let me take you back for a second, okay? Let's remember how the year worked.
Okay, let's go back there, okay.
Well, no, because people don't understand these things since they're just used to sitting in front of the computer all day.
Sure.
They don't understand what the work year was like.
Caught it.
In the spring, you plant.
Yeah, caught it, yeah.
With the first thaw, now mind you, you plant different things. Vegetables, grains, but they all have different seasons, different growing times. But in the spring, basically, that's the time for planting. Planting is not easy. It's agricultural labor is not easy. Now, at the same time, you've also got animals you're dealing with. Cows and sheep and things like that. Now, you work X number of days planting the Lord's crops. The rest of the time, you're planting your own. You understand?
Yeah.
Now, your neighbors are also planting on the same days, or maybe different days, but anyway, each of them are also working X number of days planting the Lord's crops, but then they're planting their own as well. So you've got maybe 10 days in the spring that you're going to spend planting his crops. The rest of the time is yours to plant your own. Along comes the summer. The summer is the great waiting time. Then it's just a question of making sure the crops stay moist. But that takes a certain amount of effort. It takes weeding. It takes driving off bugs and things like that. Again, 10 days working the Lord's field, the rest of the time you're on. Now comes the autumn. Guess what happens in autumn?
What happened? The
harvest.
Of course.
But the harvest comes at different times because you're harvesting different things. Nevertheless, you spend 10 days harvesting the Lord's fields and the rest of the time your own. And then, of course, by that time, because winter is coming, you also have to kill off any of the animals you haven't sold. And so you're not going to keep for breeding. So that's why, incidentally, and you've got to get ready for winter, because remember, there are no crops coming in the winter. There's nothing. So in the late autumn, you have the harvest. You bring in the various crops. You kill the animals you're going to kill, and you salt or smoke their meat. and put it away for the winter. So 10 days a work season goes to your Lord. But then, interspersed through these seasons are various major feast days. And that is when you are his lordship's guest. Especially, and most particularly, during the 12 days of Christmas. Open house. You come in and celebrate. And to the amusement of the Lord and his guests, who has provided you with all sorts of food and booze, you sing and dance and have a good time.
I think that's an unfair characterization you've laid on the IRS, because the implication is, or you paint a picture as if we're giving 100%, as if it's equivalent to a day purely working for your Lord.
Those aren't my figures. Those aren't my figures. No, the Lord's are. The IRS figures aren't mine.
Well, no, I'm saying you give 30%. So wouldn't it be fair to say 30% of 200 some 60 some days?
But it's not 60 some days. The let me see. I can find this.
What? We're just doing math now. What are you looking up?
Well, it's the question is, how many days a year do you work to pay off your annual tax?
I just did the math for you.
How many is it?
If you pay 30%, then it's 30% of the days you work would be equivalent to like giving 100%. 100% for X amount of days would mean that the rest of the income you earn could go purely to you. It's just chopped up differently the way you give it, like in terms of working for the Lord.
So what you're saying is that you paid off that in 30 days of effort, you've earned the amount of tax you're going to pay, the income tax.
I'm saying in 60, 70 days.
Yeah, but 30 days are what the peasant worked for his Lord.
Yeah, but he gave everything to it. What if he only dedicated 30% of that day to his Lord? Then it would be stretched out more, wouldn't it?
No, not at all. Because
in order to get the
you come up with 60 to 70 days that you have to work to pay off your Lord. Now you pay 60 to 70 days to pay off your Lord. Right now.
Okay.
They worked 30 days.
Okay.
Now, if you worked 30 days and every penny went to your master, would you have paid off your income tax?
Not during that time, but that would be stupid to have to pay off income tax during that time.
But again, you've got to pay off your income tax. You have to. How many days does it take you to pay off your income tax? Let's say if you're paid. All right, we'll come up with a figure. Let's say you make $100,000 a year. What percentage of that goes to the federal income tax?
I don't know. Let's say 38%.
All right, 38%. You make $100,000 a year.
Make an even 40. Make an even 40 for easy math. Okay, 40%.
All right. So it's 40%. All right. Now, 40% of $100,000 is what?
$40,000.
Okay. See, it is easy. How many days does it take you to earn $40,000?
Let's see here. 40% of 12 months. I can't do math. What is that? 5 months?
Okay, we'll say 5 months. How many working days in 5 months?
Oh, 5 times 4, 20 times 4. 80 days?
80 days. So you've got 80 days that you work to pay off your Lord.
Okay.
The peasant has 30 days. You've got 80.
I'll do that trade. The peasant doesn't get fast food or air conditioning or cell phones or the internet, so I'll do that trade. He doesn't get running. He doesn't get indoor plumbing. There's a lot of things he doesn't get.
Yeah, but you don't get that stuff because you pay your income tax. If you didn't pay your income tax, you'd still be getting them.
I mean, so
the point I'm making is that you work longer and harder for your master than they did.
No, I don't. I'm not out in the fields farming. I got a cushy office job. I sit down. I'm actually a victim of heart disease.
That's what conceals, you see, the basic injustice.
The basic injustice, huh?
Well, yeah, because you see, if all the things you loved were provided for you by the government, that would be different. And of course, everything that the serf had was provided for him by his lord. His grain was ground in the lord's mill, and his animals grazed on the lord's common ground. And if he was starving, if the crops failed, guess who was obligated to try to keep him alive?
You know, we agree with the same thing. Like, I'm not disagreeing with you that just because we live like kings doesn't mean the government should have the right to tax us and work us hard.
Well, now mind you, the government has a right to tax us for the services it provides.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Like the police and so on. But the question is how much and in what manner will it be done?
Okay.
Now, what would happen? How much more money would you have, taking our medieval friends for a moment, if you were in fact working only 30 days a year for the government? How much would you be making over what you're making now?
How much more would I be making?
Yeah. 20 days more, according to the pattern we came up with.
Well, also too, we're discounting the cost of living. How much did these peasants need to make to live decently compared to us?
Well, this is where it gets a little bit cray-cray to try to compare, for the simple reason that, as you pointed out, because we're on a money-based economy, and because the value is constantly slipping out, we're actually constantly going downhill. Whereas when you're eating something, I mean, there's the 3 meals a day or 3 meals a day. And if you're being fed 3 times a day, there's no value slippage. You're eating.
You know, I agree with everything you said in terms of, you know, how things should be done and split up and
the point I'm making,
but I don't believe poor us.
No, I'm not saying it's not my point.
Oh, okay.
My point is we're not as superior as we think we are. And what the Catholic social theorists of the 19th century wanted to do was to imbue company owners, capitalists, with the same regard and care for their workers that feudal lords had for their serfs. Now, the problem with saying that is that the modern mind, which revolts against any kind of hierarchy, immediately bristles. Oh, I'll never be a serf. I'm a free man. To which my laughing response is, that's why you work 50 days a year for your master instead of 30, because you're free. That was the whole genesis of this long, random thing. We pat ourselves on the head at how free we are. My point is, A, we're not as free as we think we are. B, paternalism is not a bad thing. I would much rather, if I were employed by somebody outside Tumbler House, I would much rather he thought of me as a family member, even though subordinate, than as a mere commodity. That if I couldn't pay my way, needed to be removed. See, what happens if your kid can't work? Do you throw him out of the house? No, you don't throw him out of the house. Well, maybe if he's on drugs and is cutting himself. But no, it doesn't work that way. And so the whole idea behind corporatism was to somehow take the feudal spirit and transfer it into modern industrial society. That was the spirit behind corporatism. And again, the minute you use the feudal example, people get very upset. But that's because they don't know the feudal example the way the originators of corporatism did, because they lived 100 years before we did and had educations, which we, of course, lack. Just because we're stupid doesn't mean we're smart. But at any rate, don't even write that down or turn it into a bumper sticker. But this is the big problem, you see. The modern mind revolts, absolutely revolts at the idea of anything less than full quote-unquote equality. The problem is, number one, equality doesn't really exist anyway. It never has and never will. And number two, because we pretend it does, we conceal our ongoing subjugation. I don't mind being a subject. I just want to know who I'm subject to. We have to accept the fact that we're not free and never will be, because that's not the way human beings are. It's not the way human society is constructed. We've always had masters and we always shall. The question is, what is their nature? Who are they? What do they want out of us? Just like we'll always have a state religion, whether we like it or not. The church will never be separate from the state. It's just a question of what church is it going to be, even if it's the first church of communism or the first church of woke. It's as simple as that. And see, because we're so far away from reality, we get angry and upset when we're reminded of it. This is where your conspiracy theories come from. They've taken away our liberty. No, they haven't. You never had any. What has happened is that you suddenly realize you don't count for anything in the system. So now the next question is, how can things be better? That's the real question. It's not, how can we be free? You'll never be free, not in the sense you think. No one ever has been, no one ever will be. But life can be better. That's the question. How can it be better? And that brings us back to Salazar. He and the other corporatists of that era wanted to see how life could be better. Now, they faced a lot of opposition, a lot of vested interests on the one hand, and a lot of, how do I put this nicely, a lot of communist influences on the other. They had their own solution, you see. And their solution was much simpler. So, he did not react well to a lot of his opponents. As far as the monarchy goes, part of the problem with the Portuguese monarchy is that, number one, they had had a civil war back in the 1830s, very similar to the Carlist Wars in Spain. And as in Spain, the conservative Catholic, more Catholic side was defeated and sent off into exile in Austria. Interestingly enough, Kaiser Karl's also to be beatified wife, Zita, was the granddaughter of the exiled Portuguese heir, Dom Miguel. Well, the liberal monarchy that took its place in Portugal was overthrown in 1910. And as far as Salazar was concerned, it had brought about a number of the problems that he was trying to solve. So he was not what you would call a monarchist in that sense. Now, what escaped him, and was unfortunate really, is that the reverse of what happened in Spain, the liberal line died out, and the Miguelist line continued. So, also, he had the same problem that a lot of people in his position have had, which is that he was not really, having set up a regime, he wasn't really clear as to how to continue it after his death. And this, you see, is the problem of a strongman, of any kind of strongman. He sets up a regime that may work well enough while he's there, But if it's so dependent on him personally, when he's gone, it won't last. Franco hoped that he'd be able to continue it by restoring the monarchy. It didn't work. Salazar hoped it would. He thought that if he restored the monarchy, his system might not survive. So he did the opposite, and it didn't survive. This is why, when you hear me go on about the possibility of having a strong man in the United States, I tell you it's all dependent on his quirks of personality once he comes to power. Well, yeah, and that's going to be the problem we'll face. It's not easy, you see, because the very act of setting up a new system, as with Napoleon or Bismarck, the chances of it surviving you are not great. Not impossible, but not great. Even Charlemagne, the idea of his system survived him and eventually reemerged as the Holy Roman Empire, but it didn't survive him initially. The Carolingian Empire broke up under his son. So these things are hard to, even with the best of wills and the best of support, none of this stuff is certain.
Okay. Thomas, if you'd like more on Salazar, we also have, I'm pretty sure we published a previous video on Salazar where Charles talks in depth about him.
There's a good website. It's in Portuguese called Salazar Obrador Nacional or something. But you'll really need your Google Translate if you're not a Portuguese reader.
Okay. Whew, we spent a long time on that one. All right.
Well,
it's my fault. It's my fault. Look, I'd rather be me than a medieval peasant. That's all I'm saying. Is that okay? I mean, is it that really hard to understand to want to be at the top of the Tumbler House Tower instead of...
No, it's not. I'll just say you're personalizing, which is a very modern thing to do. It's kind of like when I say, and I've had this happen, by the way, and I say that really it was our intervention in World War I was wrong, and it was disastrous, especially as regarded ripping apart Austria-Hungary. And someone's response is, "Oh yeah, well my grandfather got the Congressional Medal of Honor in World War I." Okay, bully for your grandfather, and I'm very happy that he got it. But it really, and I'm sure he was terribly brave, and I'm glad his gallantry was recognized. But it doesn't really have anything to do with the question at hand. We'd all rather be who we are now than anywhere else.
Well, I guess it's just for me, I guess perhaps it's a matter of being grateful for how much prosperity we have enjoyed, which is nevertheless not due to the government. So it's not like the government earned the right to tax this much, but it's still...
It's a different issue entirely. I mean, if you were to ask me would I want to be a medieval serf? No. Would I want to be a medieval lord? No. Would I want to be the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation? Hell no.
What? I don't understand.
No, it's all right. Anyway, no, I wouldn't. Frankly, all of the wealthy people I know, I wouldn't trade places with. But that's a whole other issue. Entirely different issue. I mean, it's great being grateful for what you've got. But the fact of the matter is, if the system was somewhat different, your life might be much better.
Isn't it fair to say that whatever system it is, whether it's feudalism, corporatism, monarchy, its success is going to be on whether it's Catholic or not? Because to me, looking at these instruments in these systems, these people ultimately have to be good. If they're corrupt, then the whole thing is just a mess.
Well, a good comparison, frankly, is between feudal Europe and Tokugawa Japan.
Okay.
Now, there are a lot of apparent similarities. You can see between our knights and the samurai the code of chivalry, the code of Bushido. You can see a lot of similarities at first. Then you begin to look at the details. You realize there are a lot of differences.
Yeah.
For instance, if you were a medieval knight and you took a sword and cut a peasant in the fields in two, at the very least, you would not be liked, and probably bad things would happen to you. If you did it in Japan, nobody would think twice. Why? Well, because it was an honor for the peasant to be cut in two by a samurai training with his sword, and in all likelihood, he would incarnate as a higher being.
Yeah, I guess that's another example, is like the non-Catholic version of chivalry is even ugly like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, why do you think Game of Thrones is such a bleak place?
Yeah, that's like the non-Catholic, non-Christian version of like medieval Europe.
Yeah, and it's horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, the best thing about the world of Game of Thrones is that it never happened, which is the worst thing about Middle-earth. I mean, stop and think about that for a while. Would you rather live in Middle-earth or Westeros?
Oh, well, I mean, that's not a question. I was wondering where in Middle-earth, perhaps, but
well, yeah, I don't think there's
I don't want to live in
place
Mirkwood.
Like Mordor.
I don't want to live in Mirkwood. I don't want to live in a lot of different spots.
Yeah, but by and large, there's nowhere in Westeros I'd want to live.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
I mean, no. Yeah. In the 60s, you would see posters with things like "Escape to Middle-earth." I don't think anybody says "Escape to Westeros."
Well, that's because it's realistic and gritty. All right. Next question
Unlike
is from
Mordor.
All right. Next question is from Carl. I have a question for Charles about the biblical account of the Tower of Babel. I have often thought of this story and how it provides insight into humanity and the love of God. It seems apparent that due to humanity's arrogance and hard-heartedness, we as humans needed to be humbled in a way that saved us from ourselves. After the Lord scattered us over the face of the earth, tribalism in geography has kept mankind from uniting to our detriment. Globalization, technology, and the consolidation of languages worldwide, however, are actively reversing this. As we watch humans play God, for example, manipulating genetics so that any two persons can have an offspring, I have to wonder, at what point and by what method will mankind be substantially humbled and disunified for our own good? What are your thoughts and opinions?
Well, I don't know. I mean, certainly it feels as though we're building something horrendous. Now the scientists are yapping about genetic splicing of human genes and non-human genes. Chimeras, as they call them.
I think there's a novel on that.
There's a novel on it, but the French government, the French Parliament, just approved it.
It's the Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah. You are an animal. I mean, the whole gender thing and monkeying around with people so that men can have kids.
It's gross.
I don't know. What I do know is that mankind has two warring principles. One is the hatred of strangers, and the other one is a instinctive dislike of the other families, other towns, other nationalities, other nations, etc. But the other, at the same time, is a unitive principle, a desire to bring all men together. And these two constantly war with each other, even among individuals. The faith, of course, baptized the concept of the empire and made it as universal as the church. That's sort of gone into eclipse since the 19th century. But I can't help but feel that a lot of the papal enthusiasm for the EU and the UN is a sort of unconscious yearning for the idea of the Holy Empire. I don't know what's going to happen, of course, but things don't look good. And I can remember thinking before the COVID came down, how much longer can this go on? Rather as we've got a huge blister that's getting bigger and bigger, and you feel the only thing you can do is pop it. I get sort of the feeling that that's where we are as a culture. And it doesn't have to be this way. Take the UN, for instance. If you got rid of the gender confusion, feminizing stuff, and the population control element of it, they actually do a lot of worthwhile things that really should be done by somebody. But it's poisoned. And, you could say the same of our own federal government or the European Union. We think about all the terrible evil stuff they do. We forget that there's good stuff they do too. Unfortunately, the bad stuff kind of outweighs the good in a lot of ways. And at the end of the day, we're still stuck with millions of dead infants, which kind of takes the shine off anything.
So much of the evils in this world relate to technology. It occurred to me the other day that transgenderism actually couldn't exist without our current level of technology, because without the operation, it can't be a thing. It's impossible. No. It's kind of striking that that whole way of life simply hinges on technology.
Well, there are a lot of things like that. I mean, look at our very own podcast and everything that Tumblr House do.
Sure.
This is simply, I mean, this is a matter of course to you, but it's not to me because I'm older. But every now and then I reflect on the fact that what we're doing here and now, we have an audience, small as it is, that's literally around the world. Quite literally.
Yeah.
And that is just amazing to me. And I've met people through it that I could never have met otherwise. I've gotten to know people that I couldn't have known otherwise. I have a godson from Calcutta. That couldn't have happened.
It's true.
That couldn't possibly have happened. So, God brings good out of evil, and just as our Lord was born, in all likelihood, when and where he was born, precisely because the Roman roads made it possible for the first apostles to bring the faith all over the Roman Empire, in a way that they simply couldn't have before the network of Roman roads were established, and before the Roman Navy made the seas free so you could travel without worrying about pirates. There's no doubt in my mind at all that God uses our developments for his own reasons, providential reasons. But there's also the fact that we also misuse them. The same Roman roads that made it easy for St. Paul to go to Italy and maybe Spain also made it possible to bring slaves and wild animals from all over the empire to fight and die in the Colosseum in Rome. So that's how human history is. But I would not be surprised, frankly, if these are not the last days, if our global culture gets a real smack in the jaw somehow or somewhere. But then again, I always think of Malcolm Muggeridge, who used to say that he was afraid of the coming of a new dark age. It would be even worse because it wouldn't be without technology.
Because it wouldn't be with technology, or
without it.
Oh.
In other words, The original Dark Ages saw a technological drop from the height reached by Rome.
I see.
He was afraid that we would go through a Dark Age that would be even worse because there would be no technological drop. And by that, of course, what he was referring to was the moral corrosion in mankind.
I see.
You were talking earlier about how for any system to work, you basically have to have fairly good people managing it.
Yeah.
Well, the same is true. We have the most technological society in recorded history. And thus it has perhaps a greater potential for good than any other thus far, but also a greater potential for evil. I mean, imagine, if you will, that all of our various governments and the United Nations and all that were dedicated to putting out truth instead of error. What a different world it would be. Imagine that education was really about, you'd go to Harvard and Princeton or Oxford or Cambridge and get a true and good and useful and holy education. Imagine that, instead of it just being pure poison. This is what I mean by better. Because it wouldn't be perfect. Because you know what? You could go to Oxford and you'd get an incredibly good course in moral theology. Except the instructor is still an annoying guy.
Sure.
You really don't like him.
No, of course.
So you'll never get perfection in this world. But it can be better. And unfortunately, it can also be worse. And unfortunately, with our modern technology, the potential to be much worse is just as present as the potential to be much better.
All right. Carl had a little extra thing after his question. I've heard that if listeners order within 45 minutes of hearing this broadcast, they will receive free shipping on orders over $25. Hurry while supplies last. Tell them Vinny sent you.
Yes, indeed. Operators are standing by.
That's really good, Carl.
But wait, that's not all. Order today at double $25 or make $50 order and you will still receive free shipping and handling.
That's true. Absolutely true. The more you buy, the more you save on shipping.
That's right.
It makes sense. It does. It really does. Actually.
It does. Because actually, it does make sense. Because obviously the larger the amount. Yeah.
The more you spend, the more you save. All right.
That's
Welcome to marketing, Charles. Marketing 101.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Next question is from Philip.
Okay, Phil.
Seems to me... wait a minute. Let me get this question correct. This is a funny question. Okay. It seems to be that the current writers lack courtesy. Can you remark upon the dissolution of social formality and personal and collective restraint since around the year of your birth and its social consequences? I don't know. I don't think it was his intention, but it's funny. Like, back in Charles's day, the writers had courtesy. They knew what it meant to be polite.
I don't remember that of any riot I've ever been in, frankly. I've read both Amy Vanderbilt and Emily Post, several editions of each, cover to cover, and I've never seen any advice on rioting. What the well-dressed rioter is wearing. When attending a riot, remember that while it is generally a casual event, a certain amount of formality lends a certain tone to the event. Well, I don't know what to tell you about that. I really don't. I don't know. Back in the French Revolution, they had well-behaved mobs. About the only well-behaved mob I've ever heard of was the one going to burn down Frankenstein's castle. And they were all Hollywood extras anyway.
That's true, actually.
They were being paid.
Okay.
Kind of like some of the rioters today. Oh. Sorry, I can't be more helpful.
Okay, so you can't remark upon the dissolution of a social formality and personal and collective restraint since the year of your birth. And
that I can.
Okay, yeah.
That I can do.
Sure.
I can't help you with the whole riot stuff, but the rest of it I can.
Okay.
Yeah, there certainly has been a tremendous amount of that. Primarily, frankly, in the first 10 years of my life, because, of course, that encompassed the hippie revolution. Everything since has been the ever-deepening impact of that era. There was a slight resurgence in the 80s of formality and behavior and all that, concurrent with the Reagan years. But it was kind of a last hurrah in a way. But basically, I mean, I was taught, you stand up when a woman enters the room, you hold the door for her. If she leaves the table, you stand up. You hold the chair for her. But feminism went after that kind of thing, as putting women on a pedestal and this sort of drivel. You spoke respectfully to older people. You never called your parents by their first names. They were always mom and dad till the day you died. And even our parents' friends, if they were very close friends, we called them uncle and aunt. We never called them by their first name. There are still a small handful of people today that I call Mr. and Mrs., whom I've known all my life. My sixth grade teacher is still Mr. Tritta. Or Mr. T. That was one thing. Well, I usually call your mother. I usually call Mrs. F.
Yeah.
And that that was the way you showed affection, was by diminutives like that. But on a couple of her occasions, when I've called your mom by her first name, it just doesn't feel right.
And I've never even heard that. I don't even remember you doing that.
No, I'm not comfortable with it. Yeah. And it doesn't help that she had the same name as my mom.
Yeah.
And I would never dream of calling my mother. And my Aunt Jenny, who just died, was my aunt to the end of her life. I would never have dreamed of calling her Jenny. The funny thing about that, just parenthetically, is that back in 2016, my brother and I took my nephew Albert out to Connecticut to meet Aunt Jenny, whom we had never met before. And he was very amused, as he said afterwards, to see how this little old lady turned his father and uncle into tiny children.
Yeah.
But it's true. It was yes, auntie, no, auntie. And certainly, I do insist for my nephews and nieces that they call me uncle. And the same with the children of my friends. I never let them call me by my first name.
Oh.
But the same is true with dinners and all that. I mean, if there's anything that drives me crazy, it's people eating with their mouths open.
Oh, yeah.
Like a cow chewing its cud.
Yeah, that bothers me.
If I wanted to see the food in your mouth, I'd tell you. And the other thing too is that because of the growth in technology and so forth, and everyone's self-absorption on the internet, we've lost dining together. And before that, it was with television. One thing my dad always insisted on was that we had dinner as a family. And how many families do that anymore? And when you don't do that, what you end up with is a home that becomes like a boarding house. There's no real relationship there. I think I mentioned last time that one reason why it is I forced myself to learn to read, was that when an issue of American heritage would come in, my parents and my brother would talk about it around the dinner table, and I was stuck sitting there like an idiot, which I did not appreciate. So, these are seemingly minor things, but they're not. I mean, another thing too, people often make fun of using various forks and all that at dinners, at formal settings. But you see, the reason for that is to make everything clear and apparent and quick. You see, if you've got a different set of utensils for each course, when you finish, you put them on the plate and off they go. They're not just lying there sloppy and all that. And there are a ton of other things. I mean, one of the things I was taught to do if I was eating out, you know how if you've got in fact, this happened to me today at lunch with the delicious Sauerbraten I had at the Café Vess. There was this delicious pork and garlic gravy that was left over. And I was like a quarter of an inch on the plate. What do?
Get a piece of bread and mop it up, and then eat the bread.
Indeed.
I know.
But what do you do with that bread?
What do you do with the bread?
Yeah.
You eat it. What?
Well, of course you eat it, but how do you handle putting the bread into the gravy?
I don't know, actually.
You chop it up with a knife and fork, and then each piece with the bread, you see, instead of using your fingers to break up the bread and scush it all around, what you do is you drop the slice of bread on the plate, you chop it up with a knife and fork, and then you use the fork to spear and swoosh.
Interesting. Makes sense.
Well, yeah. And see, it makes it easy. And if everybody knows it, nobody's staring at the way you eat because there's nothing to stare at. See, that's the funny thing. People think that etiquette existed so that snooty people could feel good about themselves and that they were in on the deal and nobody else was. That's not true. Etiquette existed so that everyone would have common means of doing certain things and everyone would be comfortable and on the same level. And it's interesting that in those days gone by, and certainly before my birth, but not too long before, lower class people would do their best to emulate their betters in dress and behavior and all that. And of course today would say, oh, that was phony. Yeah, well, the result is that today our masters attempt to look like proles and act and behave like them. Do you think that's any less phony? I'm one of the people. No, you're not one of the people, not with an $8 million income. You're not one of the people. Why do you pretend? Well, my roots are with the people. Well, all of our roots are bound up with each other thanks to DNA, but that doesn't mean anything at all. You're not setting a standard of behavior. You're not setting a standard of anything. All you're doing is collecting your money. You know, I remember one of the first wealthy people I ever met kept a full staff of servants. And I asked him why that was, because he really didn't need it. And he said something interesting to me. He said, because if you've got my kind of money, you have an obligation to employ as many people as possible. Now, when he was young, that kind of living was standard for the wealthy. What happened, of course, was not just World War II victimizing multi-servant households, which incidentally was done by the Bureau of Wages and Prices very determinedly, as you'll read in Puritan's Empire. I go into great detail about it. But beyond that, the rise of technology after the war meant that you didn't have to employ somebody to do those jobs. I mean, you could, but why bother when you could take care of the dishwasher and the washing machine and all that yourself? And yet you're still a millionaire. So instead of a huge house in the country with a ton of servants and a townhouse ditto, you've got a little apartment in town that you can take care of entirely on yourself. Maybe you've got a Guatemalan lady who comes in twice a week to do the dusting and stuff. And then as far as the house in the country, just go to a resort. Everything's taken care of. But you're still a multimillionaire. Your fortune, however, is not being used socially.
It's interesting.
Well, we're not supposed to think along these lines.
All right.
I mean, honestly, there was another good reason. I do talk about this in the book. There was another good reason for targeting multi-servant homes, and that is that people of that sort in local areas tended to have a lot of influence. So let's say, for instance, that the Franchinis had, and it was typical in a lot of countries, not just America, but let's say you had an estate out there in Norco, California. And the Franchini place, I mean, unlike the Tumbler House Tower, which is all business, the Franchini estate was just that. You've got stables, you've got a great house, you've got gardens, maybe there's some agricultural stuff on the side. So you employ maybe 150 people. Now, you don't just employ 150 people. There are stores that you deal with. There are all kinds of businesses that you do business with in the area around. Because keeping a place like that going requires a great deal of expenditure, and it requires a great deal of input from the local community. Well, you know what? Mr. Franchini has a lot of influence. Why? Just because he's the biggest thing in Norco, that's why. He's the one who makes it possible for all those stores to keep going. He employs 150 people directly, and they all have families. What would happen then if Mr. Franchini closed down his estate and moved away?
Everyone's out of a job.
Not everyone, but a lot of people, you bet. Now, the other thing, too, though, is that Mr. Franchini has a lot of political influence also. And one of the traits of our history is that that kind of local influence has been from the very beginning slowly but surely eroded. People become more and more dependent on the media for their views rather than on local nabobs. But who determines what the media says? Most people, you see, and with good reason, don't form their political views on the basis of personal knowledge because they don't have much. So they form it on the basis of people who they trust to know more than they do. Now, in the case of Mr. Franchini, well, you know, the boss travels all over the world. He was at university. He must know what he's talking about. So I get my views from Mr. Franchini, or I get them from Anderson Cooper. Or Rush Limbaugh. That's not true. All my views are my own, made up from my deep and searching knowledge of all kinds of stuff.
Wow. You're really taking our mind in interesting places this episode, Charles.
Well, they need to go there because it's for lack of consideration of these things to great degree that we find ourselves where we are. Prisoners in our homes while mobs run rampant. Stop and think about that for a second. Doesn't that strike anyone as wrong? And it certainly is not what you would call an organic development. We need to think differently. Well, we don't need to. We can just go with the flow, and things will go as I predicted on several occasions. But you know, I'd rather be proved wrong.
Okay.
So, what's our next question?
All right, we are running long on this one. We're coming up on 2 hours, so I'm going to have to cut this a little short. I'll limit it to 2 more questions here.
All right.
And coincidentally, the next question that I picked to say will be from top floor executive Stephen.
Wait.
Completely coincidentally that I picked a question from a person on the top floor. Yeah.
So there's no favoritism?
No, none. I mean, just completely random.
Was this question passed to you during lunch this afternoon between the lobster and the steak?
That is privileged information, Charles.
All right.
So Stephen asks, can France still be called truly Catholic, and not more like a secular donut with Catholic glaze? If it is not truly Catholic, how can it become so again? And can you recommend books on French history from a traditionalist Catholic perspective?
Well, those are all good questions. Let's see. How do I handle this? Well, it's sort of like asking, is America truly Masonic?
Ooh.
It is in its roots. It is in its basic cultural approaches. But the vast majority of Americans are not members of the Masonic order.
Wow, that's kind of firing back.
No, it's just saying the way it is.
No, I know. I mean, it's true. Absolutely, what you say is true. But
I know we're not supposed to think that way. I know. Boy, do I know. But the same is true with France. Perhaps only a minority of the French are real believers, but the faith still shapes the culture very much. Same here in Austria, and in a lot of what was Catholic Europe. Corpus Christi processions still go on. The public expression of the faith is very much there. And where you saw this was a year ago when Notre Dame burned. And the reaction of the French was just horrific. Now, what could make this come back to life, really, which is what we're talking about. If you could imagine a banked fire, how do you get that going? Well, 2 ways. You add fuel and you blow on the flames. And that's what France needs. Well, what is the fuel? Well, firstly, what's the breath? The breath is the church hierarchy. France needs bishops, even a pope, who really want to push the Catholic faith, who really want to save souls and extend the church into the heart of every Frenchman. We can't, without that, we'll be playing a holding pattern. There's just no way around that. The Catholic Church is an hierarchical church, and if the hierarchy is screwed up, the church is screwed up in terms of its outreach. And again, we're seeing this during the COVID thing. The zeal for souls exhibited by the bishops in every country, not least in the United States, is amazing. I have never seen such zeal for souls. In fact, I could hardly even call it zeal, and it certainly doesn't include souls. You've got a handful of bishops in our country and elsewhere who have not been like that, but most of them have been like the drones and bureaucrats have been their whole career. They're no different now than they were before, and that's France's problem, partly. Now, what's the fuel? We've talked about the breath. The fuel? Well, the fuel is the Frenchmen themselves, and that, of course, is where the practicing Catholic Frenchman has to reach into himself the way the practicing Catholic American does and try to evangelize as he can, where he can, how he can. Now, in terms of books, there are a lot of them. Most of them are in French. Things that you could read about are in English. Well, Bernard Fay about Louis XVI, the end of the world, and some others. Bellic's best book on French history is Louis XIV. Warren Carroll has written some really good bits on French history. Michael Davis wrote a very good book on the Vendée. Well, that's pretty much about it offhand.
Okay. All right, very good. The last thing we'll have today is actually from a comment on one of our videos. The video, we called it Objection to Monarchy, Bad Kings, where you answer the objection, a very common objection to monarchy. So a gentleman with the alias Hitchbrick wrote this comment. You should make a second video called Objection to Monarchy Number 2, Above the Law. What if a monarch commits a crime, whether it's theft, murder, or even rape? From my understanding, a royal family is above the law. They can literally do anything they want and nothing can stop them, except a violent revolution where every member of a royal family loses their heads. I'm looking at France's former royal family. A few years ago, Prince Philip got into a car accident with 2 women and a baby. Philip was driving, by the way. Luckily, the baby was fine, but one of the women were really hurt. Normally, in these occasions, you as the driver would have been charged with attempted manslaughter, but because the prince is above the law, he couldn't be charged. So what about the above the law issue? I know it sounds like a ridiculous example, but seriously, we've had monarchs, or just royals for that matter, whom have been far worse than Philip could be in a lifetime, and they have never faced justice before. I know Republican leaders have dodged justice before, but this is targeted specifically to a monarchy and not a republic.
Well, firstly, I'd like to point out that he demands a higher standard out of the monarchy than he does out of the republic, which is interesting that he begins with that.
Yeah.
That's kind of an admission all by itself.
Teddy Kennedy comes to mind. What's that place called?
Chappaquiddick.
Chappaquiddick. That's royalty. Yeah. That's American royalty, right?
That's American royalty, all right. And, well, at JFK and RFK's... anyway. But having said that, the other thing too is that you've got to bear in mind that we today do the same thing. Think of diplomatic immunity. If an ambassador or actually any diplomatic personnel in Washington or for the UN in New York get up to any kind of mischief, we can't touch them. That's why they get into all sorts of car accidents and various other kinds of scrapes, which they don't report on, precisely because of diplomatic immunity. Many Republican countries also have parliamentary immunity, which means there's very little a member of the legislature can be dinged on. But in the case of a monarchy, the biggest watchdog traditionally was the church. If the king got too annoying, he'd get excommunicated, or the whole country might be put under interdict. And again, the general level of behavior of most monarchs has been better than that of most presidents. There have been certainly more royal saints than there have been presidential ones. I know St. Jimmy Carter, canonized while he was alive. I know.
What about Henry VIII, above the law? No president has done what he's done.
Adolf Hitler.
He's not.
Yes, elected president.
He's a dictator.
No, he was the elected president, the will of the people. Sig bloody Heil, baby.
But that's Germany. Germany isn't smart like the United States.
Okay, you let me know when the COVID and the rioting are done.
Rioting is everywhere around the world.
You would have felt differently under Abraham Lincoln, I assure you, if you were a Southerner.
The United Kingdom is no better off with all... I'm hearing Paul Joseph Watson moan and groan every single day on Twitter about the United Kingdom.
Yeah, they're in bad shape, all right. But see, their problem is they're only a crowned republic. They're not a real monarchy. They've got all of the worst elements of a republic. Ruled by politicians, by party rats. Prostitutes who are well-dressed, driven from office for consorting with a prostitute. I felt very badly for it. I felt that everyone was being unfair. And at the time, people said, why can you say that? Well, it's very simple. I'm a writer. I like hanging out with other writers. I can see why the governor of New York would want to hang out with other people in his profession.
Which governor?
Of New York. I forget his name.
Not Cuomo.
No. God, if only. I'd probably think better of Cuomo if he spent more time with his co-workers. But he puts on airs. Oh no, I'm a servant of the people. Yeah, well, so are hookers.
Gosh. Okay. Okay. So where were we?
You seem a little nonplussed.
So everybody's above the law, and this gentleman is just expecting more from a monarchy than a republic. That's what
which he is. And of course, again, for a monarchy to work properly, the church really has to be doing its job. But of course, that's true of so much. It's even true of our republic. Imagine if the church were doing its job in America. Imagine if the salvation of souls was an interest for the dear bishops. Imagine. Imagine bishops worth money. It's not hard if you try. You may say that I'm a dreamer. Well, I'm not the only one. Yeah. Yeah, imagine our civilization, our culture, not ruled by people trying to drag it down into the muck. Imagine an educational system not dedicated to corrupting the morals and emptying the minds of the young. Imagine that. Nah, what we've got is the best of all possible worlds. Imagine a setup where there was actually a sense of responsibility bred into employers. The idea that if you hire somebody, there's a bond between you. Nah, it's all much better the way we got it. Yeah, well.
Well, this was another great episode, Charles. This was some really fascinating stuff.
Not my fault. I blame the audience.
Yeah, good questions on this one.
If you guys weren't asking provocative questions, I wouldn't have to give provocative answers. If you didn't ask intelligent questions, I wouldn't have to give intelligent answers or pretend to. So, try me on things like, dear Mr. Coulombe, which of the three little elves of the Rice Krispie trio was your favorite?
It's interesting. Okay.
I like Crackle, actually.
I don't know. They're all the same to me.
So that's what I'm saying. You gotta put some effort into this. Dear Mr. Coulombe, which Teletubby would you be and why?
It's interesting. Teletubbies came and went, but you seem to have a certain affinity for Teletubbies.
Well, it was actually the Sun Baby that did it for me.
What?
The Sun Baby.
Oh, okay. I'm not a Teletubby aficionado.
No. Well, have you seen Teletubbies: The Next Generation?
Are you joking?
Would I joke with you about something that important?
Okay, you're joking. It's hard to tell sometimes, though, Charles.
Teletubbies Starfleet Academy.
I don't know. You watch some weird stuff sometimes that I can't tell.
Well, I don't know. Somebody on Twitter today was kind of amused that I'd quoted Rocky Horror Picture Show and Phantom of the Paradise.
Well, they don't know you, that's for sure.
No, you do though.
Yeah, we do.
Eclectic is my middle name.
That's for sure.
Well, all I can tell you is that, in the immortal words of Robert Louis Stevenson, the world is so filled with such wondrous things, I'm sure we should all be as happy as kings. And that's actually true despite all the garbage. Always has been, always will be. So much in life depends on what you choose to make of it. There are things you can't choose. Sometimes we're born with disabilities and so on. And that's awful. But usually, our own outlook makes a world of difference. And that we can control. And that we should control. I wish I had a magic wand to make everything good. I don't. But what I do have is the knowledge that things can be better. And they can be worse too, but they can be better. And I really would say that just as the Depression era was, for obvious reasons, I think they're obvious, one of the most creative periods in American political thought, this time too could be. So think about it, ladies and gentlemen. Think about it.
Gosh, I almost want to explore that thought that you just elucidated right there.
What's that?
That the Depression was a time of creative political thought.
Oh, gosh, yes. Now, mind you, I didn't say that it was all good. I mean, there were a whole lot of ideas going around.
Other than the governor of Louisiana?
Oh, yeah, him too. But, I mean, you had Father Coughlin, you had you had social credit, you had the butter and eggs campaign, you had EPIC in California, End Poverty in California, thanks Upton Sinclair, who was living in Monrovia, California. You can still see his house. Dr. Townsend's scheme. I mean, oh my gosh, the technocracy. There was all sorts of stuff. Wow. It was a very creative time. People were looking for alternatives because what they had, they didn't feel was working. The Southern agrarians come to mind. Distributism was big then. Guild socialism. Golly.
How come it all faded?
Well, it all faded because at the end of the day, World War II rescued capitalism.
But I mean, I guess perhaps if any of those ideas were genuinely good, wouldn't they inherently last? Wouldn't they be lasting?
Oh, not necessarily. I mean, they've all lasted in the sense you can find proponents of them. But you got to bear in mind that they were all come up with because due to the apparent failure of the system as it was, people began to look around for other possibilities. However, thanks to the timely arrival of World War II and our leaving the Depression, and then skyrocketing into prosperity, obviously the system we had was the best that it could be because it was also wonderful. And so alternatives no longer seemed important. Just different kinds of LARPing. I mean, people forget just how prosperous America was in the 50s and into the 60s. There's a lot of money. And people were living very, very well. You think you're living well. Ha! Ha! Let me repeat. Ha! When I was a boy, a typical middle-class family could live what was considered a middle-class lifestyle at that point. They could go on trips. They could put money away for their kids' college education. They could put money away for their own retirement. Now you can do any one of those things you want to.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing time. Now, mind you, it was built on, shall we say, kind of an inflated boom setup, and it began to fade in the early 70s. And in truth, again, I'm no economist, but supposedly the real living standard of most Americans has not improved since 1969. We have more toys, which conceal it. But I mean, imagine, if you will, that you didn't have the internet. And you didn't have all sorts of means of keeping yourself busy. What would your standard of living be?
What does that mean? So what does that mean? What does standard of living mean?
Well, it means, for instance, the what kind and how much of food you eat. What about your clothing? How often do you travel? What can you afford to do? And again, can you put away toward your retirement? Can you save up for your children's education? And these were all things, by the way, that people spoke a lot about. I remember. People were always putting money away for their kids' education. Much fat lot of good did it do them. Because now those morons who got their parents' money to educate them are running the show right into the ground. But nevertheless, that's the way it was.
Yeah, no, I believe that, because I feel like the economy, at least the local economy of California, is now entirely based on both parents working.
Yeah. Well, see, and I neglected to mention, but that was part of the middle class lifestyle.
Yeah.
You had one parent working, and that one income was able to generate everything I've said.
Right. Now too, yeah.
And I tell you, I mean, I remember how shocked I was the first time I had a classmate whose mother worked. I couldn't believe it. Because nobody's mothers worked. My mother never did. She never, from the time we came to California, she was acting back home. But when we moved out to California, and they decided that just wasn't going to do it, she turned into a housewife. And sometimes I'd come home for lunch, she made my lunch, and she'd always make dinner in the evening, sometimes with varying success. But that it was a big deal for us to go out because we didn't have a lot of money. But and mother put steak onto the plate as many nights a week as she felt she could get away with. Macaroni or tuna casserole on Fridays, mystery dish on Saturday night, liver on Wednesday.
Okay.
See, that was the other thing. People had meat every day, which before World War II was unheard of for most people. They were lucky to have it on the Sunday. And Depression era cooking, well. So where I'm going with all this is things have definitely decayed, but as I say, they are concealed to a great degree by the sheer volume of entertainment that comes into us through the internet. You don't really notice that you're not quite as well off. And the biggest thing, you're actually quite right, and I hadn't thought of it, but the biggest thing is that your wife has to work just for you guys to maintain a life, and then that of course means that your kids, we go back to the boarding house routine. Your kids will go to daycare, and both parents come home from their respective jobs just as tired and out of sorts. Each of them expecting the other to comfort them. And that is the life of the vast majority of Americans. And it is definitely decayed from my far-off childhood. But again, concealed through the help of the internet and things like that.
Okay. Well, I like the hopeful spot of the creative innovations that perhaps tough times bring.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if what you've got isn't working, people begin to think of alternatives.
Yeah. And
up until now, see, again, people are generally conservative with a small c. They don't like change, really. And what they really want is to be left alone and not beaten or starved. You're given a choice, or burned out for the sake of our rioting friends. People really don't like that. So usually, if you leave them alone, They're not starving. They're not being beaten. They're not being burned out. They're content. So that does not conduce to looking to alternatives. Even if they're not happy with what they've got, as long as they're not actively unhappy, they'll manage. But if they aren't, if they're basically unhappy, that's when people start thinking in other directions. And people who become content with both parents working, and they haven't really noticed what it's done to the family.
Okay. Well, that'll do it for this episode, Charles. It's been another humdinger.
Well, we can't leave them like this.
How are we going to leave them? The choice is yours.
It is. And I'm going to suggest to everyone, as soon as they have finished with this broadcast, to get back on Google Earth, to get back on Google and look up The Sword and the Stone opening sequence.
From Disney, the cartoon?
Yes.
Really? That's one of my favorite cartoons.
Mine too. It's one of the first I remember seeing in the theater.
Oh my goodness.
1963.
I actually know what you're talking about there.
Yes, the song and the turning book.
Yeah.
A legend is sung of when England was young, and knights were brave and bold. Yes, that sequence.
I never understood why that particular Disney movie wasn't more popular. I thought that was one of the best ones.
I think so too. And as I say, it's the first I remember. I remember seeing it with my dad. And the funny thing is, in the later years, the cartoon itself faded, but I never forgot the opening sequence of the book and the pictures and the song. I never forgot that. And then, on the 10th anniversary, 1973, my brother Andre took me to go see it, because in those days, remember, you didn't have, movies didn't play on television. Old movies, you didn't see them.
Yeah.
And Disney movies would not play on television. I mean, they had The Wonderful World of Disney, but they played what were basically made for television movies.
Yeah.
And they'd also do their live action. But like their cartoons, like Snow White and things like that, you didn't see those on Disney. They would re-release them every few years. And then everybody would go and see them, and they'd make another killing. So The Sword and the Stone was re-released in 1973. And then I saw it again. And was amazed at what a wonderful show it was. Really enjoyed it. I mean, I remembered the opening sequence. It was exactly what was lodged in my memory. But the rest of it, I just didn't remember. And it was great.
Yeah.
But my brother took me to see that at the old Clinton Theater on Vermont, right by LACC, which is no longer there, of course. But at any rate, that was another great thing to see. You could go out to the movies. Now, you know how much it costs to go to the movies.
Yeah.
It's a major investment. But in those days, $1.50. You get a double feature with a cartoon and a travelogue and sometimes a newsreel. My personal favorite, however, the World Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, 25 cents, and worth every penny even then. That's where Andre and I saw such classics as The Corpse Grinders, The Undertaker and His Pals, and The Immortal Truck Stop Women. That was where all the real top quality films went. You're looking very unimpressed.
I'm not in a position to judge, Charles. I don't know.
Truck Stop Women was a movie that spoke to the angst of who we were then.
I'm sure.
It affected the entire Weltanschauung of a generation.
Okay.
All right, fine. Be that way. Well, listen, I do have, however, two other points quick to make before we dissolve.
Okay.
I have one question for you first.
Okay.
Actually, two.
Yeah.
All right. If it's Monday.
It's off the menu.
But wait a minute. What about the soul you save?
It may be your own.
God bless you all, folks, and a happy St. James's Day.